All righty, let me call the meeting to order. This is a regularly scheduled Greer City Council meeting called and convened this September the 8th, 2015. Having duly assembled, I'd like to ask Councilman Riley Bettis, if he would, to lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance as well as the invocation. If you will, please stand and remain standing through the invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, I pray that Greer can continue to be deserving of your abundant blessings. We pray for all of our citizens and especially our brothers and sisters that work here at the city and our family and friends, where we have experienced great losses recently. We know that we can all know peace through your abundant love. We are promised that through our belief in your word and faith in your infallible plan, we'll gain strength to survive and heal. Guide and direct this council tonight to make decisions that are acceptable in your sight. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you for joining us this evening. Indeed, we are gathered for one of our regularly scheduled meetings, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to pick up an agenda to see what we will be doing in terms of some information tonight. We set aside a time for public input. We call that a public forum time. And Ms. Duncan, do we have anybody to appear in public forum this evening?
No, sir.
Okay, with that then we'll move to the minutes of the council meeting. Council, you have the August 25th minutes contained in your packet this evening. I'll entertain a motion to receive and a second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Ms. Bookert?
Yes.
Mr. Dumas?
Yes.
Mr. Bettis?
Yes.
Ms. Albert?
Yes.
Mayor Danner?
Yes. We also, from time to time, have petitioners that come to tell us about events that are important to not only our council, but to our community as well. This evening, we'd like to welcome Kyle Mensing, who is with the Greer Development Corp., who brings an announcement in regards to a new event that's going to be occurring in the city. Kyle, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, council and staff, for allowing me time this evening to talk to you about the farmers market. I'm very excited to be able to tell council that starting on Thursday, September 10th at 4 o'clock, Greer is getting its very own farmers market. It'll run every Thursday evening from September 10th through October 29th. It'll be in the Greer Florist parking lot at Poinsett and Main Street, which ensures a great deal of visibility with easy access to parking in the public lots in the area, as well as the lots that the private businesses allow visitors to park in after hours. The woman planning this, Christy Ray, has done a tremendous job approaching vendors, getting early buy-in from some local Greer farms to help steer it, and really envisions this being a true farmers market in the sense that it will put an emphasis on local plants, local produce, local food. She's also brought in a lot of the downtown vendors and merchants that have a chance to sell some items there. So we're very excited about what this brings to Greer. I think Greer is very ready for a farmers market, and the community is looking forward to it, and very excited for a well-planned, well-run event that she has cleared with city and police department. All questions have been answered, so we're really expecting a high level of safety and patron enjoyment. I'm happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability that the council may have about the farmers market.
Council? Cal, do we have an estimated number of vendors for the first night?
I'm awaiting the final vendor list, but I believe we're going to start with around 18 or 19 vendors. And I believe she's already fielding interest for vendors to join next season as well. So there's been a lot of interest in this from both vendors and community side.
Good deal. All right. And the hours again are from 4 till?
4 to 7.
4 to
Thursday
7.
Evening.
Okay. All right. Others? Thank you, sir. We appreciate the information.
Thank
Look
you.
forward to the event. The screen is down and the chief is up, so that means we are going to have a presentation by
our Fire Chief Dorian Flowers, who is going to provide us with a update on the fire department. We're used to having departmental reports. I understand that we are at the point where you've been on the job about 100 days, and this is kind of an overview of your landing period here, and sort of a summation of getting your feet on the ground and bringing some items to our attention that you may have come across, and give us some information as to how you see the department moving forward. And so I think we'll look forward with anticipation here to your presentation. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, sir. Mayor, members of council, this is more of a snapshot of where we're at and maybe some food for thought for the future as much as it is an update. So basically over the past 100 days, and I'm going to, if it's all right, kind of turn around like this a little bit for you. Over the past 100 days, I've spent a lot of time kind of observing the department and also looking at some of the procedures and how we do things, and maybe some of the history behind what we've done and what, why we've done it, that kind of stuff. So I thought it'd be a good time to come in and actually, update you and give you some thoughts for the future. Now, understand, I'm not asking for any kind of decisions or anything like this. This is just for your information. Obviously, if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to try to explain those as much detail as possible. But understand, again, this is a 10,000-foot view. It's not a down in the weeds view at this point. So it's a little bit of a work in progress. Okay. So the first thing is challenges. Future growth. We just had a community master plan come out, and we're estimating that in the next 15 years we're going to be looking at probably 100,000 people. That's something that we need to obviously start planning for now, not just in fire service, but police and all of the different facets that we offer the city and our citizens. So that being said, we have to plan for that growth from a call volume and also a service delivery standpoint. Current organizational structure, I've got some concerns there. I think we need to do a little bit of reorganization that will add some accountability and responsibility at different levels within the department. Nothing major, but for example, we've got a captain and we've got a lieutenant on each shift, and then beyond that we don't have any supervisory roles, but we have issues that occur frequently where we don't have a supervisor on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So going forward, that's a concern that I have. We want to ensure that our staff is properly prepared for the future growth, and part of that is having people in specific positions with specific roles and responsibilities that will help them towards the future with that career development. So whenever they move up or promote, they know what is expected of them and they can perform at the level that we expect. And obviously that falls into career development. The next thing is facilities. Some of the facilities, I'm sure some of you know now, are aged and dated, specifically Station 1. One of the issues that'll be touched on here in a minute also with apparatus is that the apparatus is getting bigger, okay? So overall height, that's an issue at Station 1 right now. Eventually we're going to have to replace the ladder truck. The overall height of these trucks is not coming down, unfortunately. Right now, we would not be able to replace the ladder truck and put it in Station 1 because of the height restriction. So that's just an example. And then, of course, as we move forward, we're looking towards the future and growth and development. If we're looking at having to build new facilities and or relocate current facilities, which I've got a couple maps I'm going to show you here in a few minutes, we need to do that from an educated position with all the data and resources that we need to make those kind of decisions, so we make those decisions for the best interest of our public and our citizens. Personnel, again, we've always heard, I'm sure you've heard many times before, that we need more personnel, we need more personnel. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that we need a certain number of personnel. I don't know what that number is yet, and I'll explain that to you a little bit more in depth later on. But I will tell you that as we grow, if we grow at the rate that is foreseen from the community master plan, we will not be able to meet the needs of the community with the current staffing. So that's a big, broad, statement. Again, 10,000-foot view. Several administration challenges, including, payroll. There's, payroll and fire service. I think that, Mr. Driggers can attest to this. Is the fire service is a very strange animal when you start looking at Fair Labor Standard Act, stuff like that, exemptions, and when you can take and have exemptions, when you can't, and specifically related to the fire service. So, there's some things we can do in the future to kind of streamline that, make that an easier process, not only for the city but also for the employees. But poor Marie over in payroll, she has her hands full when it comes to fire department payroll. So, and then of course career development and roles and responsibilities, and that plays back into what I said earlier. We need to take and position ourselves better for in the future that we can actually have people in positions that are ready to move up and know the roles and responsibilities of the position above them. And then finally, apparatus. Apparatus, again, they're larger, they're more expensive. I think you guys have probably bought a few fire trucks, so you know they're not cheap. They do last for a long time, but again, that plays into the other parts of this. We're talking about facilities and what have you. And then also, I don't want to come up here and tell you that, hey, we need a new fire truck. I want to be able to give you a plan and show you in the future when we can expect to have to replace a fire truck. Obviously, that's a moving target, but at least you know ahead of time what time frame you're looking at instead of being surprised by it, okay? We have insurance for surprises, so, let's hope we don't have any more trucks that get wrecked or anything like that. Immediate concerns are communication systems. Currently, we operate off a VHF system, which is inadequate in coverage. We have issues specifically in buildings. That's not necessarily going to be, simply fixed by adding a couple extra repeaters here and there. It's something that we really have to look at as a whole picture. Different technology utilized by different agencies that doesn't allow for interoperability. So one of the issues we have is some of the partners that we respond with currently through a mutual aid agreements. We get on scene, we can't always talk to them readily. Now, we can hand them a portable or something like that, but it's just not as smooth a transition as it should be. To that effect, Greenville County is working towards a new communication system. I have that starred because we just had a meeting last week about that, stakeholders meeting, and best case scenario, we're still 2 years out. And right now, the discussion is that the Greenville County will build out the infrastructure, and then we will be responsible for buying the radios. Now, that's not just us, that's for PD also. And to give you an idea of what kind of cost those radios are, just so you don't have sticker shock, you're looking $4,000 to $5,000 per radio. That's per portable, per mobile, okay? So just for the fire department, just an estimate based off of that. Now I'll give you a little more information in a minute, but that's $200,000 to $300,000 just in radios. Okay. Now to soften that blow a little bit, the Greenville County Fire Chiefs Association applied for and was successfully awarded a grant, the Assistance to Firefighters grant, that will help purchase some of those radios. It will not purchase all of them. Okay, but there is a timeline on grants. Again, dispatch, Greenville County, the fire departments and EMS, obviously fire department and EMS work real hand in hand. They are working towards trying to develop a plan for a consolidated dispatch so that all the fire departments in Greenville County as well as EMS are dispatched out of one location. Again, that will add some streamline to the service delivery, and you don't have to worry about transition from one dispatch center to the other, etc. And then procedures. One procedure that we currently do right now, and I don't have an answer for this, but right now we cross-staff Squad 6, which is the SUV, as well as the rescue truck, as well as the ladder truck. The issue or the concern that causes me is something that we'll talk about a little bit more in depth in a minute, but something called turnout time. That is from the time that the fire department is notified till the time that the wheels start rolling for us to respond to an incident. Right now, we staff everybody, those people are actually staffed on the SUV. So at 2 o'clock in the morning when we have a call, if it's a EMS call, they go straight to the squad, they're out the door, and no problem, there's no delay. But if it's a structure fire, residential, the rescue truck goes. So now they have to take their gear off of the squad, go to the rescue truck, which is not a big deal, it's right next to the squad. But they have to take it off, get dressed and everything like they normally would, get on the truck and roll. If it is a commercial structure, they have to go all the way to the far end of the building with their gear, relocate everything to the ladder truck, and then get on the road. Obviously, you can see where that would delay our turnout time, that time we can get on the road. So that is a concern. I don't have an answer for that yet, but I'm working on that. So that leads me into some possible benefits and ways to help things, and that is automatic aid. Automatic aid versus mutual aid. Automatic aid is, at the time of dispatch, all of the necessary resources, regardless of the agency they're from, are dispatched simultaneously at the same time, and they're on the road. Okay? Mutual aid is similar, except that it's not automatic. Whenever the call goes out, we would respond with our resources, get on scene, then make the determination that we now need help. Then, of course, we have to wait for them to respond and get on scene. So in some cases, it's really more beneficial and better outcome to have those personnel and apparatus on the road initially. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean every call or medical calls, things like that. We're talking specifically for structure-related calls. All right.
Chief, let me ask you a question.
Absolutely.
On the automatic aid, you've got mutual aid, automatic aid.
Mm-hmm.
The agreements we have with Pelham Batesville is based on shared use.
It is.
Is the automatic aid the same? Are we going to be, I guess shared use is contractually.
Yeah, it's going to be similar. The difference is that typically automatic and mutual aid agreements are not, they don't cost money, which when I say that, there is a cost to the department that's providing the resources, but we don't pay for that agreement. So it's not a contract that we're paying for. It's basically almost like a gentleman's handshake that you agree that if you need us under these circumstances, we're automatically going to respond with the resources that you need, and likewise, you're going to do that in return. So again, we're not going to pay the department to do that. They're not going to pay us to do that. It's really mutually beneficial because no one department can do all of it alone, and none of us can afford to build a department that will encompass every possible event that may occur. Does that answer your question?
For right now, yes.
Okay. All right. You sure? Okay. All right. And of course, when I say reduce the overall long-term budgetary impact, what I mean by that is that now with the changes in how ISO looks at things and credits personnel and apparatus from our partners, it will help us to reduce the need to build a bunch of new facilities and add a bunch of new equipment and what have you. It doesn't eliminate that. Okay, I want to be very clear about it. It does not eliminate that, but it does reduce that over a period of time because now instead of having 3 locations and staffing at those 3 locations and the apparatus we have a pool of apparatus and personnel and stations that we can pull from. Okay. So I thought maybe the pictures would help kind of point some of this out, and I will apologize that they're probably not as great as they could be due to the resolution. So I think I'm going to move over here to the other side real quick, if that's okay, and point out a few things so I don't turn my back to everybody. But if you see up here in this area, this is 5 miles, and those of you familiar with ISO, 5 miles is what ISO requires property to be within a fire station's response district, okay, to be accredited. So right now, from the 3 stations that we currently staff out of, you can see that we've got 3 areas that cause a little bit of concern. All right, I don't think any of these are really news to you or anything like that, because we have contracts in place that help us cover these areas. So it's definitely not saying that we don't cover the areas. Right now, we're covering those through various contracts, what have you. All right. So as we look at these individually, you can see this is the north one. What you see here is these dark spots are actually address points. All right. So that means that those locations have structures on them, parcels with structures. All right. That center area, these are parcels, but you see there's no black dots or address points currently. Okay. So those are parcels that are city, but they're not necessarily completely within 5 miles. And then finally, the kind of southern area, again, you see some dots there. Those are address points that fall outside of 5 miles. Now, this next slide, let me explain this a little bit to you first, is, we can look at things a couple different ways. We can look at it based off of distance, and we look at it off of time. And those can be one and the same, but not always. So, for example, just because it's 5 miles from a fire station doesn't mean that we can get to that 5-mile reach in a given amount of time, because we don't know what the road conditions are. If it's a straight shot, yeah, we could probably get there in 4 or 5 minutes, no problem, if we're able to run a straight shot at, a higher speed. But if it's serpentine, or we have to take and make turns at intersections, what have you, things like that, acceleration, deceleration, then that's going to delay the response time, which is obviously different than distance. So this slide is illustrating 4-minute travel time from our 3 existing locations. Obviously, again, you see the black dots, those are addresses. In this slide, there's about 4,900 structures that fall outside of 4-minute travel time. Okay? 8 minutes, you can see what happens here. Obviously, the colored polygons around fire stations, they get a little bit bigger because obviously you can travel further because we're giving you a little bit more time to travel. Again, you see that there are some address points up to the north that are outside of that 8-minute travel time. Now, this is the benefit of automatic aid. If you see behind me, all the yellow, those are areas that our partner fire stations, the fire departments, can reach from 4-minute travel time, or excuse me, 5 miles. So earlier you notice those areas that we have in there that we didn't have coverage, now they're covered. All right, so that helps us from a 5-mile standpoint, which is ISO. And this is what it looks like with a 4-minute travel time with automatic aid. Again, the yellow being our partners. So you can see how much more of the city we can cover. That basically reduces that 4,900 structures that we couldn't cover within 4 miles or 4 minutes down to around 1,100. So significant improvement, okay? And when you go to the, it's supposed to be 8 minutes, I apologize. 8-minute travel time, that actually goes out even further. So that dropped it from 619 structures that were not within 8-minute travel time to 0. All right. So why is travel time and why is response time important? Well, time versus products of combustion. If you see this curve, you'll notice that, again, I'm going to get back over here so I can see. You'll notice that right here is the area where the fire is being identified and actually calling 911. And you see here smoke detectors. This is residential fire sprinklers. They activate in this area, so they notify the occupants and or give them a way out. Get into this. Here's dispatch, and then here's response to fire by the fire department. All right. And this is where a standard commercial sprinkler system activates in this range here. As this time goes, you can see what the fire does here in growth. All right. So that's why it's important. And And down here you can see 0 through 10 minutes. This is how it progresses in a normal fire this day and time. Okay, with the newer building processes and construction techniques and materials, and also your fire load. This is probably a little easier for you to understand and see than that picture. So this is response time from our customer's perspective. So I always try to look at things from a customer's perspective. So when they have a fire, their response time starts then. All right, they identify they have a fire, they know they need help, they're going to call 911. So that area from detection of fire to the call 911 is prior to notification. Then you have, after notification but prior to arrival, you have call processing time, which is the time it takes from the time the 911 operator answers the phone to the time they actually notify the fire department. That is there's a goal of that we're going to cover here in a minute, but it should be 60 seconds or less. That is a national goal. Then you have turnout time. That is the time from the time we're notified to the time the wheels start rolling on the truck. That means that we're preparing to get on the truck, get our turnout gear on, get prepared to get on the truck and respond. And then obviously you have travel time. Travel time is the distance from the fire station to the incident. And then of course after that you have setup time. That's pulling your hoses, deploying equipment, getting set up, getting ready to make the attack on the fire. And this chart basically just shows travel time, speed versus distance. And the one thing I want you to key in on here is 35 miles an hour. Okay, so this is miles per hour, and this is distance. And you'll notice 35 miles an hour, 1 mile is going to take you 1 minute, well, 1.71 minutes, based on the 2 minutes. All right. The key there is that the average response time that a fire truck is going to respond is about 35 miles an hour. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't go faster than that, but by the time you take into account acceleration, deceleration, your turns, traffic conditions, weather conditions, what have you, they're going to average about 35 miles an hour. Okay? So let's talk about nationally recognized goals. Call processing time, I hit on that a minute ago, from time from pickup to dispatch is 60 seconds. Fire department turnout time from notification to wheels turning is 90 seconds. Travel time, and some of you that are familiar with NFPA 1710, which I'm not going to preach that to you, but if you're familiar with it, this 4 and 8 minutes probably is familiar. So initial arrival of first fire engine is 4 minutes, and that's travel time. Your initial full alarm assignment. What that means is if the full alarm assignment is 2 engines and ladder, they expect that 2 engine and ladder and all personnel to be on scene within 8 minutes. That's what that means. So if you add all that together, they're looking at 6.5 minutes total response time 90% of the time. And then for a full alarm assignment, 10.5 minutes 90% of the time. Again, that is based off of NFPA 1710. And I am not saying that we need to go down that road. What about ISO? Well, ISO looks at it a little bit different, similar but different. They are looking at built upon area of a community, and they're saying that you should have a first new engine company within 1.5 road miles or 3.2 minutes of travel time, and 2.5 road miles or 4.9 minutes of travel time for a ladder or service company. Where this all comes from is they did a study many, many years ago. It's called the RAND model. And that's all that up there that you see right now. You don't really have to read all into that, but the point that I want you to take home from this is right here at 1.5 miles, it figures out the 3.2 minutes, and that just shows you the math behind it. That way you know there's no hocus pocus in that. Same thing here, 2.5 miles, it's 4.9 minutes travel time, and that's matches up here, and then assumes an average response or speed of 35 miles an hour. So what about NFPA 1710? Well, that is a standard that has been developed over several years, and there's several different iterations, and we're currently on the 2016 version of that. It is based off a 2,000 square foot detached single family occupancy, and the total number of people that is wanting to be on scene for that is based off of the task analysis for that size structure. And that's where your 4 and 8 minute travel time comes from. So what does all this mean? What it means is this. Regardless of those standards and ISO and everything else, we as a community need to determine our level of performance. We've got to determine what our community needs, not necessarily what a national standard says, not necessarily what ISO says. We got to look at it from our community. So who decides? Well, obviously external stakeholders being our citizens, internal stakeholders being obviously our elected officials. Why? It provides a framework to allow us to address future needs of the community. You don't build a house without a foundation, right? So it provides us a baseline benchmark to demonstrate our performance. It helps us identify areas for needed improvement, and it will provide the foundation to create a fire department strategic plan. So where do we go from here? Well, again, we have to determine our performance standard, response time performance indication and adoption. That means eventually down the road, we will have to work on identifying what is going to be our response time. What are your expectations of us? Because without me knowing that, I have no way to develop a strategic plan or answer questions that some of you may have, like how many people we need or how many stations we need or are they in the right place or any of that. So we have to identify that initially to determine the answers to those questions. We need to conduct a community risk assessment, and that's different than our hazard mitigation plan. Community risk assessment is we take a look at our community. Again, we have to apply this to our community. We're not a cookie cutter of anywhere else. That NFPA standard is based off a 2,000-foot residential structure. That'd be great if we're protecting just a veteran community. But I think everybody agrees we protect a different demographic than just a veteran community. So, and then finally, we need to look at that risk assessment and determine a task analysis based off of what is going to be our most common and probable risk. All right, we can sit out here and say that something could happen with an airplane that crashed into a train. Could it happen? Yeah, it could happen, but that doesn't mean it's going to. And then we adopt a reliability standard. And what that means is, currently, if we have one structure-related call, we send 3 trucks and all of the people. One call. How many times do we have multiple calls? What do we do then? Right now, we're relying on mutual aid. Hopefully, eventually, we'll rely on automatic aid in that situation, so we already have run orders and know who's going to be coming automatically, and we don't have to rely on somebody on the scene of a structure fire telling dispatch, let's see, I think you need to call XYZ fire department. It'll be done automatically. And then finally, we need to develop a fire department strategic plan to provide a fiscally responsible path to improve fire department and services we deliver. And provide those future needs based off of that future growth. And that's it. Any questions?
I've got one, Chief, and it's a follow-up to Mr. Arrowwood's question, and obviously the terminology and the difference between automatic aid and mutual aid are new to me.
Okay.
I guess, and we don't, again, I appreciate the fact that we're at the 10,000-foot level here, but I suppose that I'm a little intrigued and also a little bit worried about how this works dealing with as many different SPDs and as many different departments as we have that surround the city, and just was going to ask, I guess, your insight and understanding about how this works, and particularly in relation to SPDs where you may have an ISO rating of anywhere between 1 and 7, I guess, in some cases, that immediately surround the city. And while it's encouraging to hear you say that they're our partners, that's a good way to call them, is our partners in some cases. I just wonder how you envision that would work in time, and we don't have to have the nitty-gritty details, but how do you see that panning out, I guess?
Well, I'm happy to tell you that there is a core group of fire chiefs at the SPDs that surround us, not all of them, so I want to be very clear about that, that are very much in favor of developing automatic aid agreements and processes. In order for this to really work the way it needs to work, there's going to be a lot of work that have to be done with communications. Remember, I had that on the slide, and also dispatch procedures, which means that it has to be programmed into a CAD system. And that way it works automatically. That means that there's nobody having to sit there and in the heat of the moment make that decision. So there's a core group of fire chiefs in the surrounding area that are willing to do that. And when I say Bowling Springs is one of them. Okay, there's several different ones that have come to the plate that are willing to do that. Obviously, Pelham Batesville is willing to do that. Now, as far as different ISO ratings, simply because the department has a lower ISO rating does not necessarily mean that they're not providing like levels of service, because ISO considers a lot of different factors. All right, it considers factors such as the personnel that you have, the number of personnel you have available to respond versus how many that typically respond. It also takes into account, heavily takes into account, the number of hours of training, whether they meet those requirements each year, and to what level they meet. It also takes into account the amount of pumping capability they have with their various apparatus and what their needed fire flow is. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. So simply saying that a fire department that has a ISO rating of 5 is necessarily worse than a ISO rating of 2, you can't necessarily make that direct, determination from that information. One of the ways you take and help alleviate some of that is, one, training together, and that's absolutely a requirement from an ISO standpoint for using automatic aid, is you have to train together. It has to be proven that you're training together and that you're actually working together, that you have, similar policies and procedures that you have worked on that define what a response is between the two or more departments. So there's a lot of checks and balances that would have to be put into place. This is not something that would happen overnight. This is something that's going to take months, possibly a year or more to put in place, even if all the pieces fall into place as we hope they would.
Well, I guess that sort of leads me to my second question, because it seems imperative that we would have to move to a consolidated dispatch for this system to work.
It would need to be most efficient. It does not mean that it has to be, as long as we have the ability to dispatch these other stations from our dispatch center, which we are currently doing now with several departments. So there's things that we can do in place without having to actually go into a consolidated dispatch. But from an efficiency standpoint, consolidated dispatch would make the most sense, and would also make sure that there's a lot more checks and balances in place, and you one place to go and program everything into the computer. Because what happens is a computer thinks in black and white. It doesn't think in shades of gray, whereas people think in shades of gray. And let me explain that. So, talking about distance and time earlier, just because a fire station is physically closer to you by distance does not mean that it will be the first one to arrive at your incident. Does that make sense? Because of the amount of time it takes for it to traverse its chosen path to get from point A to point B. So that is, an example of how those things, we think, oh, well, this fire station is closer to me because it's physically closer to me. Well, it may be physically closer, but it may not be closer to you in time. And time is what we're up against. That's what that whole illustration was earlier about time versus distance.
Again, I don't want to get too far in the weeds on this, but if we look, if you said Greenville County Fire Chiefs were looking at a consolidated dispatch,
Yes, sir. There's currently about 7 different dispatch centers in Greenville County alone. When I use that term loosely, there are some of the SPDs that have their own dispatch, so those are included in that 7. So right now there's a lot of handoffs, and honestly, that's where consolidated dispatch really makes the most sense, is because every one of those handoffs provides an opportunity for failure. And give you a real life example that, a friend of mine in another state, their county had a 911 call from a cell phone. Everybody carries cell phones. That person was 300 feet inside of their county, but the cell phone pinged the tower in the neighboring county. When they hit that neighboring county tower, it went to their dispatch center. Their dispatch center had no information on where their location was. They didn't have the address points. So this lady had run off the road into a pond and had enough time to actually make this phone call and tell the dispatcher where she was as her car was sinking. She finally got frustrated because they didn't know where she was at. She hung up and called her supervisor. Her supervisor knew exactly where she was at, but he was further inside that home county. He called 911, went straight to the proper dispatch. They got the resources on scene. From the time they got dispatched to the time they were pulling the lady out was 5 minutes. Unfortunately, it was too late. She went to the hospital and passed away a short time later because the car sank. So anytime you have these multiple handoffs from one dispatch center to the next, it's an opportunity for failure.
So I guess that was my point. Wouldn't having a consolidated dispatch add one more step? Because if
No.
somebody calls 911 in this area, it's currently sent to our center and they ask
Right.
fire or police, do they
Right.
not?
They do, but right now we have multiple different ways of that occurring. So if you are in Spartanburg County, that may go to our dispatch center, or it may go to Spartanburg County. If you're in Greenville County, it may go to our dispatch center, it may go to Greenville County, depending on whether or not they're on a cell phone and what towers they hit and what have you and stuff like that. Because again, you're looking at towers inside the city versus inside the county. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what I'm trying to figure out is if you're calling, there's no way of knowing if you've got a fire emergency or a police emergency till it goes to a dispatch.
Right.
And then it's directed somewhere.
Right, and they do that now with EMS a lot of times. They'll ask you what the situation is. They will, if they take the information, they determine it's a medical call that warrants a fire department dispatch, they'll dispatch us, but then they're transferring it to EMS. And sometimes that actually doesn't happen in that order. We've had situations where we have been, dispatched after the fact and got to the scene and EMS had already been on scene quite a while and was like, where are you at? Or we'd see them on another scene and they'd ask you, you respond to this call, why didn't you respond to the chest pain we had earlier? We didn't know about it.
Okay, one more quick thing, and I'm going to turn it over here to council and see if they've got any questions. EMS is apparently going to be moving to a system where it's going to be administered by looks like probably the Greenville hospital system, maybe some of the other hospitals will have somebody on the advisory board. How will that look like? What would that look like from the dispatch side?
I don't know.
Okay.
I wish I could tell you, but I don't know. They currently have their own dispatch center, the EMS does, which right now we're currently also dispatches for about 15 fire departments. But I don't know what that's going to look like. A lot of that's going to be determined by who the players are and how they structure that at the rate they're going now.
Okay. Council, I'm through. Others?
My only question is, you've pinpointed, or not pinpointed, but you've shown us a lot of possible problems and challenges. Did you have these where you came from, and did you have solutions there?
Absolutely. It's funny because, some people always, take the stance that the grass is always greener on the other side, or they've seen this, they've seen that. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of different fire departments. I've also, done some consulting work in my past. And one of the humorous things I've heard a fire chief say is, sit back, push himself away from the desk and say, now we're a little unique here, okay? We got something a little different here. No, you don't. No, you don't. It's the same problems. I don't care where you go. And when I say problems, those problems are really opportunities. I've got a lot of different ideas on how to fix different things. That's why I told you this is a 10,000-foot view. I don't have the details yet. I wanted to bring this stuff to you as quickly as possible, just so you knew where we're at, give you a snapshot of where things are, and then eventually I'm gonna take and start working through some of these issues and bring you some possible solutions. You know, ultimately, it will be your decision what solutions we implement. I will do what I did here, where I took and gave you some of the things you've heard before, which is NFPA 1710, ISO, this, that, and other. At the end of the day, we have to do what works for our community, you know, and the only way we can do that is we have to start with the foundation and say, okay, this is what our expectations are. And then from there, we can build that out. You know, if somebody, I asked everybody in my fire department, all my staff, one by one, I said, what do you think a reasonable response time is? You know what the answers were? I heard anything from 2 minutes to 10 minutes. All right, so let's go with 10 minutes. All right, I gave you the national goals earlier. So 10 minutes, you take a minute off for call processing, you're down to 9 minutes. Take a minute and a half off for your turnout time, now you're down to 7.5 minutes. We talked about 35 miles an hour for an average response time or speed. All right, you apply that to a 5-mile distance. It's going to take you 8.5 minutes to travel that 5 miles at 35 miles an hour. So right there, we can't even meet the 7.5 minutes that we had left over for travel time. So again, that's the kind of information that it's my job to give you the information and then let you make the decisions of what you think is right and what you think that we can actually obtain based off of the resources that we have. And what that means is current stations, current apparatus, personnel, our fiscal resources. That's a finite source, so we can't just come in here and throw a bunch of money at it and expect it to go away, because obviously we all have to afford to live here.
Well, I ask you that because I suspect we're going to rely heavily on your expertise and experience to make these decisions. The one thing that I'd like for you to find is a radio and repeater that we don't have to get replaced every 2 years. We get requests, if not every year, at least every other year, for new radios and more repeaters.
It's funny you say that. Again, the fire department works off VHF, the police department works off UHF. So right here in the city, we've got two different technologies. Fire department's working off a one repeater and one voter system, all right? We were having issues with just that. So I said, we've got to figure this out. What's going on with it? So we called in a radio company, they look at it, and find out the voter system was programmed wrong. So that alone has improved our communications. It hasn't completely fixed it, but that alone improved our communications.
Others?
I had a quick question. Go ahead, Mr. Griffin.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The automatic aid, that's going to require a lot of the fire departments working together.
It will.
How you going to get all of them to work together with all the different personalities? And what happens if leadership changes somewhere and then they're on board one minute and then the next minute they
Well,
decide?
the one way to do that is obviously, you have to start somewhere. And the fact that we currently have it's a core group. It's not all the departments in Greenville County, okay? And I haven't even started on the Spartanburg County side. But in the Greenville County side, there's a core group of fire chiefs that meet outside of the Greenville County Fire Chiefs Association that are working towards trying to work together for automatic aid. So one thing is agreements. You spell out things in agreements. These agreements, while they don't have money attached to them, they do have performance standards attached to them. Okay, and then you also put into place things like in order for you to cancel the agreement, there has to be a certain amount of time in there before either party cancels that agreement. And if you do have a department that changes, leadership or whatever, decides they don't want to, participate anymore, it gives you time to go to your other partners and say, can you take on this additional area, this additional responsibility? Again, all this complicates things even more. You have to look at this from a GIS standpoint. Okay, just because this department over here wants to participate, well, if I've got a fire on the other side of the city, well, they may come eventually, but they may not be the first department that I'm going to call. I'm going to call some of the other departments over here that are part of this automatic aid agreement. So you have to look at it to make sure you're getting the resources to you in the quickest amount of time, the most efficient amount of time. And then the other side of that is you don't want to deplete all the resources in one location, which is what we're doing right now when we have one structure-related call and sending all 3 apparatus with all of our personnel. We need to get to the point where we're able to bring in additional resources. So if we have back-to-back calls or we have a larger call that we can't handle with just the resources we have this bigger pool that we can bring in, and it's automatic.
Mr. Dumas?
I had a question about kind of differentiating between automatic aid and mutual aid, and I was just curious if we go to that automatic aid system, does that almost put us at a disadvantage in that we're going to be using our resources and our manpower to be responding to calls that we wouldn't have to respond to at this point, with the understanding that mutual aid is something that kind of kicks in if we need additional help and resources?
Yes, but it's give and take. If you get to the scene and identify the fact that you need help, chances are you needed help before you got there. So calling mutual at that time, now you've got additional delay. Automatic aid, you get the resources going ahead of time. As far as the additional disadvantage, if you have automatic aid set up and set up properly and built out properly, then basically it's almost like a shark's jaw. You know how it has a tooth and it pops out and the null and ready to pop in place? Well, same thing with automatic aid. It's automatically going to fill that void. So you bring in resources to backfill your needs, and that way you don't have a lapse in coverage, and your reliability doesn't get hurt as bad.
I have one more question. I know the medical calls, that's still a majority of, it takes up most of our time and resources. Last year we had a discussion about lift assist, and I was just curious if we've made any progress there, or I know it's...
I will tell you that I've been looking at it. I will tell you that up until recently, I have not figured out a way to address it. I'm not saying I have a way to address it yet, but I will tell you that some of the things, or some of the conditions of the situation that's causing us the most problems have changed, that may offer some opportunity in the future to be able to help fix some of that. We're never going to do away with all lift assists, but whenever we have a large number of lift assists on one address, there's things we can do. Some more popular than others, but sometimes they have an ability of working themselves out too. I don't know if that answers your question.
I'm just curious if it was on your if it was on your radar.
It is on my radar, and I have been reviewing it. And like I said, some things have changed recently that may affect our ability to find additional help.
Thank you.
Chief, maybe any other questions? Chief, maybe as a quick wrap-up, I know we've identified a lot of things that we needed to take a look at and need to give some thought to in the future and that sort of thing. Any highlights you want to hit in terms of some things that you've been pleased with in terms of what you found in the first 100 days?
Absolutely. You're very lucky. We're very lucky. We have a very diverse and very well-trained group of personnel in the fire department. And they are eager and willing to embrace challenges that we have going forward, and they are ready to try to make the improvements. We just need to be able to get the direction eventually from staff and from council.
Great. Thank you, sir. We appreciate the insight. With that, we'll move to the administrator's report. Mr. Driggers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The good news is when we met earlier at our staff meeting today, that my report's only about 5 or 10 minutes longer than the chief's. You know better. In all sincerity, we thought it would be beneficial today to do this report. Chief Flowers and I met, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago and made a decision that we thought it would be good to come forward and talk a little bit about what we see and some things that are happening. And I really appreciate your follow-up question, Mayor, because part of that observation is a lot of good things. We're very fortunate that we have good equipment. We're very fortunate that we have well-trained professional people. We're very fortunate that we have good agreements with our neighboring SPDs. And while we may not have really recognized what an automatic agreement is by definition of those who are professionals in the fire service, you will recognize that the very nature of some of our agreements, that is exactly what we do. We have automatic aid by assignment of territory in our SPDs, where we have made agreements and understand that what is not inside the city limits, it is best that we respond to that before they would. Oh, and if we need assistance, then we would ask for that assistance. So we have some of those very things in place today. What that allows us to do is it allows us to build on that. And I think that's where we're certainly recognizing some of these opportunities and some of the challenges as we move forward. We're facing those in all of our departments, and Chief Flowers certainly understands that. We've had great conversation about, as a growing city, we have to balance all of that growth relative to public safety, police, fire, parks, recreation, infrastructure, all of those challenges that we have as a growing community. But again, we thought it was extremely important for us, for you to see what he sees, and those things that he's going to need to be spending his time and attention as we are in the months ahead and the years ahead and making decisions and recommendations moving forward. So we appreciate you allowing us to do that. One of the things that I did share with the staff earlier today is that while we spend a good bit of time reporting to you those things that we have accomplished or those things that we have completed over a period that we would call an annual report, I think it's also important that we spend time looking at those things that are in the future. Those things that we see are in our horizon that are going to be challenges for us, and how we start to balance and approach each of those with all of the operations of the city. So tonight was a good springboard for us to spend some time doing that. I would encourage your feedback so that as we continue to look at how to do that communication and how to keep you informed and actively engaged in that process, your feedback will be extremely important to us as we move forward as well. So just wanted to share those comments with you as well. A couple of things that are happening for us. Want to make sure that you are aware. We've talked about this a couple of times, but keep in mind that this Thursday is our safety luncheon. That'll be taking place at 11:30 at the Cannon Center this Thursday. We certainly hope that your schedule will allow us to do that. We're recognizing our employees for now surpassing 365 days without a lost time accident. We're well over the 400-day mark at this point, and we're continuing to move forward. That is a major milestone for us, and we're very, very glad to be able to celebrate that. We'll also be gathering next Thursday at the same location at the Cannon Center for our Employee Benefits Fair. You will, tonight, please make sure that you check your boxes, your mailboxes here at City Hall. There's information provided to you relative to the open enrollment for our insurance program and our benefits program. Information that we need to share with you, whether or not we may have dependents that are covered, any type of policy amendments, those types of things. All of that information is contained within those packets that we've provided. So please, you'll need to receive those and be prepared to have those when you come to the benefits fair next Thursday as well. Something that's kind of interesting, we didn't really cover on it today. The chief may offer additional information, but the fire department's conducting a new program called CPR Saturdays. And it is becoming a very popular event for us in that we are providing training in our facilities on Saturdays. We limit that to 15 individuals that can participate, but we are staying completely booked up, and I think we're now scheduled through the fall, through December, with our CPR Saturdays. This is a wonderful opportunity for our community to come in, experience our personnel, our facilities, and also receive some very valuable, what could be life-saving information for the community. So we're glad to be able to continue to offer that program. Of particular interest for you as well, next week, we will be meeting with our Planning Commission, our Zoning Board of Appeals, our Board of Architectural Review. I think that's it, right? Yes. Those three groups, along with council, for a training session. That is next Tuesday, the 15th. That is your off meeting night, day. That will begin at 3:30 in the afternoon, and we are scheduled to run until 8:30 that evening. So 3:30 to 8:30, 1 week from today here in City Hall. And again, meeting with our Planning Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, and also Board of Architectural Review. And we'll also have representatives of Spartanburg County Planning Department that will be with us and sharing some information about some of their planning efforts and what we and how we share information between those two organizations as well, us and them. So we look forward to that meeting next week to make that happen. Chief mentioned earlier some information concerning the radio system coordination. That has great impact to both our police and fire departments. This is something that we've been working on for quite some time, but we're just getting to the point now of understanding what an implementation schedule may look like, and we're starting to get information on what cost could be involved in this program. As you can imagine, we are encouraging our partners at the county to be the lead in providing the infrastructure for that system. They are really stepping up and are evaluating what their role would be and could be through that process, but they are truly looking at it from a public safety perspective, not only involving the county and the county operations, but certainly all the municipalities within the county as well as the special purpose districts also. There is recognition in that process that they have 2 municipalities that have land area and residents that are outside of Greenville County. And that is us and Fountain Inn. Fountain Inn is in Lawrence County and in Greenville County. And of course, we are in Greenville and in Spartanburg. That has not fallen on deaf ears, and they are certainly working toward that end, that whatever our impact is in working with the county, that it will not be separated at the county line. We've been very emphatic that we cannot participate in a system that would do that. We have an obligation and responsibility for all of our residents in our coverage area, and we've got to make sure that whatever we do ultimately that we're covering our entire geographic area. And we have to provide not only that geographic area that we have today, but that geographic area that we may have in the future as our community continues to grow as well. Those decisions have not been made. You will certainly be involved in that once we are at the decision-making level. What we've simply been doing at this part is the background, the research, and then providing information to us. So I think, again, they're saying we're probably 2 years away from any type of implementation at the earliest. And we'll continue to work through that to keep everyone involved in that process. Just as a matter of information, our Victor Gym renovations are almost complete. We're about a week or so. We've been doing some work over in that area. Those are almost complete. We have completed the demolition work over at Century Park of the concession stand and restroom facility that's there. We'll go through our season, and then we'll start construction at the conclusion and hopefully staying on schedule to keep us ready to have those facilities open at the beginning of the next season. So that's moving forward for us. We had a very productive community meeting last week concerning pedestrian paths, potential bike paths, walking trail systems within the city. We are providing to the community still that there is opportunity for public input, and there's also a thing called wiki maps that allows the public to go onto those maps and offer suggestions about where the community would like to see sidewalks, bike paths, walking trails, connectivity. Where are those areas of the city that is the highest priority for connectivity? That is all still part of that process. It's ongoing, and that'll stay up for another couple of weeks. And then, of course, the consulting group will ultimately bring a report back to City Council, and then after that, City Council will give us some direction on path forward with that as well. And then last but not least, to share with you that tomorrow morning, if you're out and about 7 o'clock in the morning, we encourage you to stop by the Chick-fil-A location on Wade Hampton Boulevard because we're continuing our Coffee with a Cop series. This will be our third of those programs. We're doing them in each of our assignment areas, so we're moving them around the city, but tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, there's an opportunity to have Coffee with a Cop. And those have gone extremely well, and we're looking forward to that tomorrow morning as well. That concludes my report, and I'm certainly available to answer any questions that you may have now. And of course, myself and our staff is available after this meeting as always.
Good deal. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Mr. Sell, could I ask you to come here I need to ask a favor of you, please, sir, before we keep moving on. All righty. Under items of new business, the first this evening is the United States Postal Inspection Service Memorandum of Understanding. To help us better understand that, Captain Matt Hamby and Sergeant Marcus O'Shields are with us this evening and are going to give us a little insight into what we need to do in this regard.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Appreciate your time and good evening. I'll start off not with a apology, but more of an explanation. Chief Reynolds is out of town with his duties with the South Carolina Chiefs Association down at Myrtle Beach, so that's why I'm here instead of him. But tonight we bring to you a memorandum of understanding that we're asking for your approval for us to enter into. I'll give you a brief explanation of what the task force is that we're requesting to be a member of, and explain a little bit of their duties, and be here to answer any questions that you have afterwards. The South Carolina Upstate Financial Crimes Task Force is a working group of law enforcement officials from the local, state, and federal level. It also includes representatives from the legal community, from the Solicitor's Office in Greenville, as well as the U.S. Attorney's Office. The purpose of the working group is to develop a cooperative effort with federal and local law enforcement agencies charged with the investigation and prosecution of identity theft, other related offenses such as bank fraud, access device fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement schemes by means of forgery, and any other economic crime which may apply. Currently, this group meets twice per month, and they discuss cases that they're working on, and they'll offer each other guidance or recommendations for investigative techniques that have been successful in other areas. They'll compare cases that possibly could be committed by the same perpetrator or perpetrators. As we have found over the years, a lot of these financial crime investigations lead outside of our jurisdiction because most of these violators, they do it in multiple locations. So if it has been identified that there is a wide range of crimes being committed by one person or group. The task force may adopt this case maybe at the federal level. And so being a member of this task force would provide us access to a tremendous amount of additional resources that otherwise we would not have quick access to. One thing I would point out is the task force membership does not require us to sign a permanent person to the task force like some other task forces do, such as the DEA task force, but rather we would assign an investigator to be a member of the task force and represent our agency and participate in the investigations as needed. Additionally, it requires no financial commitment outside of the normal salary and benefits that we pay our investigator anyway. There is a possibility of equity sharing if funds are ever forfeited as a result of a successful investigation and prosecution. And in the past, we've had very good luck with a gambling case where that's an example of an equity sharing. This MOU lays groundwork for responding to discovery of evidence according to federal guidelines, and it establishes an understanding of how media would be addressed if we're involved with a federal case, and most of that information would be handled through the U.S. Attorney's Office. So the memorandum of understanding, as it says on page 1, it's not intended to be a formal contract, but rather an expression of a mutual understanding to facilitate the cooperation of this group. So hopefully I haven't confused you, but I'm here to answer any questions you may have. I also have Sergeant O'Shields here as well.
Counsel?
This is, I know exactly what he's talking about. I have a tenant who had some mail fraud, wire fraud perpetrated against him, and actually I fielded a call from a postal inspector who had intercepted some merchandise and was sending it back, and then there was also some more information I think that was passed along to the Greer Police Department, our department, in regards to this kind of crime, and it was way out of state. So.
Yeah, as part of my job responsibilities, I'm involved in this to some degree at the bank, and it is amazing the number of cases that come through just our 4 branches. And of course, I work pretty closely with Sergeant O'Shields on a number of those cases, and realize, as all of us do, that there are some of these cases that, you know, quite simply, there's just not much that can be done about it, but you don't ever want to completely give up hope. And we did have an instance where one of our branch managers reported some fraud that took place at a drive-through window, and one of the other agencies, certainly not us, but one of the other agencies was quite frank in their assessment of the situation and basically said there was nothing that could be done. And you hate to hear that, you know. But I think they were probably being very truthful about it. But anything that we can do that would help improve cooperation and address some of these situations, because more likely than not, some of the perpetrators of these things are people that travel our state and states all over the southeast doing this, and anything that widens our net would certainly be helpful. Others? In terms of action, are you looking for just affirmation of the police department entering into the memorandum of understanding? Is that essentially what you're looking for?
I guess
We need action by council to be reflected in the official minutes of council, because what that allows for us is jurisdiction. And council is the only authority that can grant that approval for us to enter into the agreement, so that our officer has jurisdiction outside the city with the task force, and that the other members of the task force have jurisdiction, obviously, within our city as well.
So it requires action of council, so it would be the mayor that signs the memorandum of understanding, or the
Well,
police
I'm
chief?
authorized to sign
You're
it,
saying,
but
okay.
certainly the mayor can sign that, but it
that's fine.
requires action of council
Of
to
council.
enter into the agreement.
Okay. Council, we need a motion then that the administrator be allowed to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service for the purpose of assigning an officer to that task force. Do I hear a motion?
Motion.
Have a motion and a second. Any questions? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate it. Thank you for what you do in that regard as well, too. I know there are occasions where the hard truth is that somebody that passes a bad check and doesn't have a license plate on their car is probably long gone by the time we picked up the phone and called the sheriff's department. First reading of ordinance number 19, 2015, an ordinance to amend the City of Greer zoning code of ordinance by adding to Article 4, definitions in Section 6.11, new uses for construction to incorporate unusable property requirements within the City of Greer. Mr. Pace?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We bring this forward to you, that there are particular properties that lie within the city limits of Greer that are otherwise not usable because they cannot meet usually any provisions that are laid out in the zoning code, and therefore to make that determination, we were looking forward to presenting you this as a definition change with a requirement also as the Board of Appeals would have the duties and responsibilities to approve such property if it did lie within the corporate limits, that it should comply or shall comply with 4 additional components also that in order for it to be used. And that's what we bring before you tonight. Planning Commission did review this and public hearing was held at our last regularly scheduled meeting. No one spoke in favor or in opposition to the request, and they bring that to you unanimous.
For the purpose of discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Floor is open for questions.
Mr. Pace, if the property now is unable to comply with existing zoning and construction ordinances, why do we need this?
Well, again, we have some properties that are trying to be used for other than construction purposes. There's no building or structure on these properties, and it has created a challenge for us to otherwise regulate them. And after much discussion between staff itself and legal staff, we've developed these provisions to hopefully address those issues.
So we're having a problem with something right now that's causing this?
Yes, sir. We do have an issue, particularly with one. There are others that are small and would not be deemed as usable that have commercial zoning also applied to them without being combined or used up by another piece of property.
So if there is a piece of property that's being used for a purpose that is not allowed?
Well, we certainly would not recommend enactment of an ordinance to address a specific issue.
I understand.
I mean, it would be a general. Now, we may have issues that could be cited as an example, but it would be inappropriate for us to enact legislation solely for that purpose. But as an example, we could have a piece of property that isn't large enough that because of setback requirements or for zoning, a structure literally could not be built on the site. It would not accommodate that. But it may be being used for other purposes. Folks could be doing yard sales. They could be doing farmer market type sales. They could be doing
know
those
exactly what you're talking
types
about.
of things. And when we run into those situations, we need legal authority to be able to address the activities that take place on that property. Otherwise, we have no means to do that.
Thank you. That clarified a lot for me.
If indeed this passes, would it not be proper for these pieces of property to be taken off the tax roll and not collect any taxes or fees on them?
Well, I certainly think that would be an argument that the property owner could make, that the property has no value. And if it has no value, in many instances, we would be glad to acquire that for potential public good. Widening of a road, development of gateway signage, any of those types of things. But it would be hard to argue that for us to acquire the property would require compensation at some level, and then at the same time say that it has no value. But the important thing there is that that's not a role that we have. That is completely a tax assessment role that is the responsibility of the county. We have no involvement in that whatsoever. Whatever the county tax assessor assesses a piece of property at, we have no appeal to that.
Does this ordinance, is this in practice somewhere else, like another municipality?
I know that legal counsel has been working on this for some time, but I don't know if it was fashioned after another ordinance.
I haven't found another ordinance similar to this. Like I said, it was done in concert for a long period of time, thought processes and studied to come up with this type of language for that.
Not that we're aware of.
Thus, we don't know that it's been challenged anywhere either.
Correct.
Correct, yeah.
Why would we call it unusable property if there are possibly uses?
That was the
activity on it
term
now?
also that was floated around for a few months also. And legal staff advised me that would probably be the best term to use, that it would not be usable in respects of it meeting current zoning requirements.
Well, this is the issue I have with it. A property owner is using their property within the confines of the law now, correct? That's a yes or no?
Are you, as an example,
Yes, as an example.
the answer is no,
They are not.
they are not.
Well, then why do we need this ordinance?
Because we have been advised by legal counsel that we do not have other remedy.
That doesn't make sense. If we don't have, if there's no remedy, means there's no
And law being.
law. So therefore, a particular property owner is using the property within the confines of the law. And then where I'm going with this, when you are, hello. And then we're talking, and Kimberly brought it up about we're identifying it as unusable, then we are identifying it, we're saying it's unusable. And that's, I'm afraid that's opening up a can of worms. And I think that besides it, I think somebody could have good cause to challenge the city, and I think they would, well, I don't know, just seeing it on the face looks like that. I don't think we should go down that road. I also think there's probably a lot of unintended consequences when you do things like this.
That is a caution that we certainly would give, is that anytime there is an attempt to, by legislation, to remedy one problem, it could create another.
Have we identified a number of properties that might fall into this category?
I know of 3 that I can think of quickly.
But at some point, these properties probably, if the adjacent property owner acquired them, could be usable.
And combined with another piece of property, absolutely.
Yes.
Because the meets and bounds would change. They're typically just too small.
If they're too small, how are they operating a business on that site now?
With no structure.
So as long as there's not a building
There's not a
There's
building.
not a building.
on it.
Some of the parking's taking place in right-of-ways of DOT and the city, or could be, or are. And,
Theoretically.
Theoretically, the parking's,
yeah.
that's real.
Yeah, they are. I mean, but now I'm getting off base there a little bit. What was the question again? I'm sorry, I missed
The question was, if they're not currently using it, and we're calling it unusable, but they are operating a business out of that space, I don't understand how they're able to operate a business out of that space now.
It's unapproved for the locations they're doing. They're just doing these businesses, sometimes as pop-up businesses, and regulations are lax in how those are regulated, and this would help determine that those properties would be regulated for pop-up businesses with this type of standard in place.
On some properties, that could include Christmas tree sales. It could include fireworks. It could include children's toys. It could include bicycles. It could include Velvet Elvis and couches.
Is the property owner of the properties that you're talking about, is the property owner the one that is allowing this? Has he given permission, or is he the one doing it, or she?
Talking about a specific property.
Well, I mean, of all of them, I'm talking about all of them. I'm not just talking about one. He said he could identify three.
You've given yes to each of those.
So the property
Sometimes
owner
it's the
is
property
aware
owner
and the
with full
property
knowledge.
is okay. and-
Sometimes the property owner allows someone else to do it, and in some instances, the property owner is completely unaware of it.
Right, okay, okay.
You mean to tell me that there's nothing on the books that could shut somebody down right now that's doing that type of?
Not that we can find.
Now, we would think so as well, but according to our legal counsel, we do not, without this tool, which doesn't mean there couldn't be another tool, but our city attorney has said that he does not believe that we have standing to disallow those types of operations on these types of properties without defining that it's not permissible.
Do they have to get a business license to do that? I mean, if they're operating a money-making business?
And they do.
Do they get a license? They do
Do.
have a license, okay. They have a license to do it, okay.
Yes.
So they have a license to do it.
What would stop that nut from saying we passed the legislation just for him?
Well, I've tried my best to not say that.
Well, I mean, you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying, I'm just saying what would stop a nut.
Just any nut, right?
Any nut.
Theoretical
From
nut.
saying that we passed legislation to stop any nut from doing, something that they.
We've had issues in the past, like Mr. Biggers was talking about, that these trucks with sofas show up at different parts throughout the city. And sometimes those are weekend flyers, as I'll call them. They're in and out before we know they happen. And
Now,
some
is
of
that-
those are hard to.
Okay,
hard
now,
to
is
catch.
that someone who has permission from the property owner?
Exact, there is a way to obtain that with permission from the property owner, and therefore we apply these other requirements that says you gotta set it back 45 foot from the right of way if it's along US 29. The fireworks stands and those situations also, they're to come by and get permits. And as long as they're on property that basically meet these guidelines now, they're permitted.
Okay.
Okay, so
So
even
I-
though they're there, even though they continue wherever these locations are, if they continue, as long as they follow the guidelines for the setback and all that.
Correct.
They would be fine. There's no problem.
Correct.
As long as they follow guidelines.
Ordinance
for the-
doesn't say prohibited in all circumstances.
Right.
There are conditions that it can be allowed. Years ago, we passed an ordinance, our sexually oriented business ordinance is a great example of, it's clear that we are not allowed to prohibit those businesses, but we are able to regulate those businesses.
Okay.
And we can determine where and under what circumstances certain types of businesses can operate, and you have that authority by land use planning and zoning. This is a very similar situation of giving you the authority to set the conditions that certain operations can take place. But it needs to be in a safe environment where there's parking and setback as well.
Following safety regulations.
Correct.
To affect safety for the public, yeah.
Well, now, don't we already have safety regulations? And don't we have, if something is creating a hazard, don't we have a regulation that prohibits that? If it is traffic, let's take that for an example. Or if it is a fire hazard, don't we have things on the books already?
Some of those tools we are able to use, some of those tools we are not able to use.
Nervous.
Your concern is extremely valid. I mean, can someone challenge that we have taken action, which is a taking? I mean, would this be considered a taking, that we've taken action that prohibits someone of use of their property? Our legal counsel believes that this ordinance is defensible, that no, we're not. That you have the authority and the right to regulate through land use planning and zoning what can happen where. And in certain circumstances, we do not have the legal authority to say you cannot do this in this location. And again, it could be a roadside stand, it could be something temporary. We know it's nothing permanent because we can't get, the setbacks do not allow for something permanent. It's typically these pop-up type operations that you would see on a major thoroughfare.
In that first paragraph, where the city of Greer has determined that an ordinance should be adopted to allow the city of Greer to designate certain properties within the city as unusable due to their size, lot configuration, or other criteria. And then they say, i.e. topography. I'm not sure that we need to be telling somebody that their topography prevents them from using it.
Well,
That's changeable, you know.
if you make it larger,
That's not how I look at topography. I look at the curves, the lay of the land for topography.
the topography would impact it, it could impact it by setbacks.
Well, if you had
I mean, you could have a 10-acre lot that's only 10 feet wide. It just keeps going.
That's true. But I don't call that topography. I call that something. Topography to me is if you had a 10-acre lot that had a huge hole in the middle that made it hard to use. You could always fill that hole, you know. Or if you had a 20-foot mountain in the middle of it, you could always level that.
Sure.
I'm just not sure that's a good example, but
I understand your point. Does not mean that we could not go back to our city attorney and express that there are some concerns. And and we could ask for additional explanation, and by all means, council could choose to amend or choose not to adopt. I think, at issue here are some challenging properties that we have throughout the city and looking for a tool. Maybe this isn't the right tool, and I understand your concern. We've just reached out to legal counsel and asked for assistance to develop what they believe would be usable for us, and this is what was offered.
Okay, so if we're talking about these tiny places that are unusual and don't meet the general requirements, then why don't we just help to kind of define what those are? I mean, can we not just be more specific about what we're looking for from a commercial site and then just say that anything that doesn't apply to this? I mean, I guess that's maybe what we're trying to accomplish here, is that?
That's the attempt to accomplish. One is, the first part of that is just the definition, unusable property. And there it dictates what articles and what sections that it has to comply with. So that's taken care of there. And the new uses or construction, that's current code, and there's one paragraph that's current under that, but we're requesting to add A and then 1 through 4 to that as a continuum of that. And again, it gives the powers and authority to the Zoning Board of Appeals to review those cases on a case-by-case basis as they're presented to them.
Let me give you an example. It says in here, paragraph 3, that any portion of any business shall not be located with any public right-of-way. And to Mr. Airwood's point of, well, you can't do that anyway. You're absolutely right. That is an SCDOT regulation that we can't enforce. Only they can enforce that. We can't. By this ordinance, we have the authority to say you can't operate the business within the right-of-way. Because we've tried to go to SCDOT to say this is a problem, and they go, yeah, we have that in a lot of places. And they do. I mean...
That's kind of the way they address everything.
So, I mean, but I think an earlier comment is that I mean, I can't agree with you more. An attempt to remedy one thing could, it could have an unintended consequence.
Not to so prolong it, but I would definitely want more information on it. So I don't honestly feel comfortable with it. Without.
We have a motion and a second on the floor in regards to it. Floor is open for discussion, amendment for...
Make a suggestion that we table it and possibly to clarify some of the questions we raised.
Mr. Duggan or Mr. Hughes actually author it?
Duggan.
I would suggest that we invite Mr. Duggan to explain it. I mean, I think that's going to be the better alternative, because any written explanation may generate another question, and we certainly can do that.
One thing we can look at is I've had on the agenda for next Tuesday night, the attorney would be speaking to us on some other topics. This could be a question posed to them at that time.
There?
Yes, sir.
That'd work perfect.
That'd be a good idea.
Yeah, Daniel is at this current time. I don't know if John was available,
Yep.
but I can
Sure.
check that and see.
Very good.
Ms. Duncan, who made the motion?
Councilman Airwood was first and Councilman Griffin was second.
Mr. Airwood, you want to withdraw your motion?
Well,
Or motion
Amend your
table.
motion to
I
table
would,
it?
my first thought
Hold it
is
over.
no and put it to the question, because I don't, I have a lot of reservations about this entire ordinance. If it's only a matter of enforcement issue, then why didn't we just come out and say, okay, we're going to enforce DOT's regulations? Don't quite understand why that has to be in an ordinance for us to do that, but so be it. But if the majority of council wants, further time to discuss it and rehash it, then I will, what do we want to do? Table it? Is that the question?
You just hold it over.
We can get John to come in and clarify.
Yes, I'll table my motion so we can gather more information.
Well, let's do it this way. If you will withdraw your motion for first reading of ordinance number 19-2015, we will receive a motion to table it as a secondary.
Okay, I will withdraw my motion for the first reading of ordinance number 19-2015.
Mr. Griffin, would you withdraw your second?
I'll withdraw the second.
I'll entertain a motion that we table or hold over. Hold over may be easier to do. I'll entertain a motion that we entertain a motion to hold over ordinance number 19-2015 for further information.
So moved.
Have a motion?
Second.
Have a second. Any discussion in that regard? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker. Yes. Mr. Dumas.
Yes.
Mr. Bettis.
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, first reading of ordinance number 20-2015, an ordinance to provide for the annexation of property owned by Linda Slatton, Joshua Lunsford Slatton, Matthew Brendan Slatton, Zachary Williams Slatton, Jens Walker Slatton, located at the northwest of intersection of Burns Road and Snow Road by 100% petition, and to establish a zoning classification of R12 for said property. Mr. Pace?
Mayor and council, this comes to you as first reading, has not been heard by planning commission at this time. That is scheduled for September 21st. This is in an estate. It does have several owners, family owners, as part of the deed search that was done on that property. This is at the intersection, again, of Burns Road and Snow Road. It would be adjacent to the community that's already under construction and development of some single-family homes on Snow Road and Burns Road. This will be, again, on the other intersection of that road. The lot right now is heavily wooded lot, and it does have some topographical challenges to it, as Mr. Bettis was stating earlier. And it does contain 60.73 acres, and there is the proposal to construct 142, I think that's right, units for this property. And again, this comes to you as first reading. The zoning would be R12 cluster for that, and again, 143 lots would be desired to be constructed on that.
By show of hand, is there anybody in the audience this evening who is a family member or a representative of the owners of the property with us this evening? Let it be noted, no one indicated so. Entertain a motion to receive ordinance number 20-2015.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Floor is open for discussion. Questions? Comments?
Where are the Slattons when you need them?
Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Ms. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Dumas.
Yes.
Mr. Bettis.
Yes.
Ms. Albert.
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you, sir. Council, in regards to item D, it's the City of Greer Policy and Procedure Manual. I have an item that needs to be brought for discussion tonight, as requested by our Human Resource Manager and presented by our City Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You are aware that we recently had some personnel issues involving a state statute that says that any political subdivision of the state of South Carolina must comply that no individual may be employed by a political subdivision of the state who is in default of a federal student loan. We have an obligation to comply with that state statute. However, in our personnel policies and procedure manual, we've had no reference to that. We've had two situations that we've had to identify and address with employees of the city. And one of those went to a grievance committee, and a recommendation of the grievance committee is that we needed to also, while we were complying with state statute, but we also needed to have it in our personnel policy and procedure manual so that all employees are aware of that requirement now and moving forward. So we are recommending that that language be added.
Council request comes from the administrator to add state statute to our policy manual. Do I hear a motion to receive?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion in that regard? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Bookert,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, the last item before us this evening is the first and final reading of resolution number 11-2015. This is a resolution in support of the e-fairness legislation in Congress, and I am sorry that was not able to give you more lead-in time on this, but do want to present this evening some information in regards to e-fairness legislation at the request of the Municipal Association. As many of you are aware, there is currently no way for states or local municipalities to take any action in regards to internet sales, or at least the collection of state or local taxes on internet sales. It's been determined certainly at state level and has not gone without notice from the Municipal Association and others that often buyers will use their local merchants for a demo ground or a test facility for purchases that they may want to make, and then turn around and make those purchases online and circumvent the possibility of potentially having to pay tax on such an item. While there is a mechanism for sales tax to be reported on a state tax return, it leaves it in the hands of the purchaser to do that, and quite often to follow up on decisions about whether or not that's been paid and who it needs to go to. The Municipal Association has asked, now that Congress is finished with their summer break, that municipalities and others come together to address what is known as Senate Bill 698, the Marketplace Fairness Act of 2015, and the House accompanying bill, which is called the Remote Transactions Parity Act. Both of these would give states and local governments the flexibility to require remote online retailers to collect the sales tax that has already been owed to them. Closing an online sales tax loophole will help level the playing field for many Main Street brick-and-mortar retailers. Additionally, it would mean resources for local governments to fund many of the local services, particularly in regards to public safety and infrastructure. The idea behind this is that if this council would be willing to endorse a resolution, then we would forward that both to the Municipal Association for them in their efforts to collect those, as well as make our intent known to our senators and representatives at the national level. So I bring that to you this evening and ask again, on a fairly short time period, your consideration of endorsing the resolution that is attached, and would ask your favorable insight in that regard. And so with that, I put that before you this evening.
I've supported this ever since the issue came up. I see absolutely no reason that all businesses shouldn't be on the same level playing field. And I know there's a lot of argument to that in a lot of different areas, but when it comes to paying your fair share of sales tax, to me, there's no argument. Everyone should be subject to it. The only thing that amazes me about this document is in the fifth whereas is that the Supreme Court actually admits that Congress has the constitutional authority to pass legislation to overrule its decision. I can't believe they ever said that. Someone should tell Congress that.
Others? Mr. Bettis, would you like to make that in the form of a motion, please, sir?
I will make the form of a motion to accept this resolution to support the e-fairness legislation.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Floor is open for discussion. Other comments? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Sorry, got ahead of myself. Yes, sorry. Sorry.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, we have no items to consider this evening in executive session. We stand adjourned.